The alarm in my private chamber screams before my eyes even open, and I am on my feet with claws extended before I understand why. HFY is gone from his harness. The straps hang empty, chewed through at the buckle, and the door to the outer hall stands open just wide enough for a small body to squeeze through. My name is Vaelkar Thrinashi, Emperor of the Thrinashi Dominion, ruler of 11 star systems, and master of a fleet that has never lost a war. In this moment, none of that matters. My hearts are pounding for one reason only. My son is loose in a station full of strangers, and my son cannot run from danger the way another hatchling could. I move through the corridor faster than my guards can follow, my tail cracking against the metal walls of this cramped human trade station we docked at only hours ago. I had come here for something small and forgettable, a routine resupply on a route between systems, nothing that should have mattered. But HFY has never cared about my schedules. He has only ever cared about the world outside the walls I keep him behind. And today, for the first time in longer than I can remember, he found a way to reach it. I have to explain something before I go further, because it will matter for everything that follows. HFY was born 2 years ago, with a spine that curves the wrong way beneath his shoulders. His wings never opened into anything more than folded scraps of skin. His back legs answer to nothing, not command, not instinct, not even pain. He drags himself when he moves, using his front claws and the strength in his chest. And among my people, this is not spoken of as a difficult thing that happened to a child. It is spoken of as a verdict. We call hatchlings like him unfinished. The word is not cruel by accident. It was built to be cruel on purpose, generations ago, back when a dragon who could not fly or fight was considered a danger to the nest, a mouth that ate food it could never repay. The old rites still exist for hatchlings like this, quiet ceremonies that no one describes in detail because no one wants to say the words out loud. My advisors have not said them to me directly either. They only mention options, softly, the way you would mention a difficult decision about supplies or trade routes, and I have let them speak that way because stopping them would mean admitting that my son is the subject of the conversation. I love him. That should not need saying, and yet in my world it does, because love for an unfinished child is treated as a flaw in the parent, not a virtue. I have hidden him for 2 years. He has grown up behind reinforced doors, aboard private transports, in rooms where only trusted staff are permitted, because I could not bear for the court to see him and decide, quietly, that I am weak for keeping him. So when I see the door of my private chamber standing open, my first thought is not embarrassment. It is fear, plain and immediate, the fear of any parent whose child cannot defend himself in an unfamiliar place. My second thought, arriving a half-second later and lodging like a splinter, is that in a station full of strangers, someone is about to see him. Someone is about to see what I have spent 2 years hiding. I round a corner into the station's public concourse, and the noise hits me first. A wash of voices and clattering trays, and the low hum of environmental systems built for a species smaller and softer than my own. This deck was clearly designed with humans in mind, a trade outpost built to service the crews of a dozen different species passing through, and it is nothing like the sealed silence of my palace. There are open stalls selling food I do not recognize. There are benches bolted to the floor and screens flickering with arrival times. There are humans everywhere, moving in that quick, distracted way they do, and somewhere in the middle of all of it, my son is loose. My guards spread out behind me, 4 of them, each one easily twice the size of any human in this concourse, and I feel the old instinct rise in me to simply clear a path by presence alone, the way an emperor is supposed to move through any space he enters. But right now, I do not want to be seen clearing a path. I want to find HFY before anyone else does, quietly, quickly, and get him back behind a closed door before this becomes a story that spreads. Then I hear him. It is a sound I know better than my own name, a soft chirping bark, half question and half complaint, the sound he makes when he wants something and cannot reach it. It is coming from a small cafe tucked against the far wall, tables and stools arranged around a counter where a young human woman is moving back and forth with a tray balanced on one arm. I see him before she does. He is dragging himself across the floor toward the counter, his back legs trailing uselessly behind him, his front claws digging into the smooth deck plating for purchase, moving with the same stubborn determination he always has, the determination that breaks my heart every single time I watch it, because it reminds me how hard he has to work for something another hatchling would do without thinking. I open my mouth to call out, to have my guards move in, and simply collect him and carry him away before anyone can react. That is the plan my mind builds in half an instant, the plan built entirely around limiting what other people are about to witness. I never get the chance to give the order. The woman turns, sees a small dragon dragging himself across her floor, and does not scream. She does not step back. She does not call for help or freeze in place the way I have seen soldiers freeze at far smaller surprises. She simply bends down, scoops him up in one motion the way you would lift a bag from the ground, and settles him against her hip like she has done it 100 times before. Ashkevel goes still in her arms, not frightened still, comfortable still, the way he only ever goes when he feels safe, and I have not seen him look that safe outside of my own arms in longer than I want to admit. "Well," she says, glancing down at him and then around the room, as if checking whether anyone is missing a very small, very determined passenger. "You're a bit far from home, aren't you?" She says it lightly, the way you would say it to any lost child, and something in my chest goes tight and strange, because in the last 2 years, no one has ever spoken about my son in a tone that light. Every conversation about Ashkevel in my court is careful, hushed, wrapped in the kind of caution people use around something broken or dangerous. This woman is talking to him the way you would talk to any small creature that wandered somewhere it should not have gone, nothing more and nothing less. My guards move first, stepping forward with the reflex of soldiers protecting an emperor's secret, but I raise a hand before they can reach her. I do not fully understand why, not yet. I only know that something about the scene in front of me needs another moment before it becomes a confrontation. The woman notices the guards approaching and looks up, sees me standing at the edge of the concourse, and for a moment her expression flickers with the recognition of rank. She has clearly seen enough traders and officers pass through this station to know what armor like ours means. But the flicker passes quickly, and she does not put Ashkevel down, does not step back, does not treat him like something to be handed over carefully as if he might break. "Yours?" she asks, nodding down at him. "Yes," I say, and the word comes out rougher than I intend, because I am bracing for the moment her face changes, the moment she notices the wings that do not open and the legs that do not move, and reorganizes her expression into pity or alarm. It does not happen. She simply shifts him a little higher on her hip, the way you would adjust a bag that had slipped, and looks him over with a kind of practical attention, checking whether he is hurt rather than checking whether he is wrong. "He's warm," she says. "Good sign. Has he eaten today?" I do not answer immediately, because I am still waiting for the moment that never comes, the moment where she asks what is wrong with him, or looks at me with the particular blend of sympathy and discomfort I have grown so used to at court. Instead, she is simply asking a mother's question. Has he eaten? Is he warm? Is he comfortable? Exactly the questions anyone would ask about any small creature found wandering somewhere it should not be. I do not know, I admit, and it is true. My staff manage his meals. I have not asked that question myself in longer than I want to think about. She raises an eyebrow at that, not unkindly, more like she has just learned something small and slightly funny about me, and turns back toward her counter, still holding him easily against her side, still balancing her tray in the other hand as if carrying an emperor's son through a busy cafe is simply one more small task in a shift full of them. I stand there in the middle of the concourse, guards flanking me, staff behind them no doubt already composing messages back to the homeworld, and I cannot move. For 2 years I have built my entire life around controlling exactly this moment, the moment a stranger sees Ashkevel for the first time. I had imagined horror, I had imagined disgust, or pity, or the careful, distant kindness people show something they consider tragic. I had never imagined this. I had never imagined someone simply picking him up and asking if he'd eaten. She glances back at me once more, easy and unbothered, and asks the question that will end up changing more than either of us understands in that moment. Well, are you going to come get him, or should I just keep him behind the counter for the rest of my shift? I do not answer right away. I am too busy realizing that for the first time since Ashkavel was born, someone has looked directly at what he is and treated it as nothing more than a detail, no different from his color or his size, and I do not yet know what to do with the shape of that feeling settling into my chest. Her name, I learn a few minutes later, is Mira. She tells me this the way you tell someone your name when they are clearly not going anywhere, half amused, half curious about why an armored dragon and his 4 guards are still standing in the middle of her cafe at the start of a lunch rush. I give her my title out of habit, and she raises both eyebrows and says something like, "Well, that explains the escort," then goes right back to refilling a mug for a customer at the counter, Ashkavel still balanced against her hip like he weighs nothing at all. I should leave. That is the sensible choice, the choice any advisor would recommend if I ask them, which I have no intention of doing. Take my son, thank the woman for her trouble, return to the ship, and make sure this entire incident is buried before it can become a story that travels faster than my fleet. Instead, I find myself pulling out a stool at the edge of her counter and sitting down, because I want to watch what happens next, and because some part of me is not ready to take Ashkavel out of arms that are holding him so easily. Mira works through the next 20 minutes exactly as if nothing unusual is happening. She takes orders, carries trays, argues briefly and good-naturedly with another server about whose turn it is to restock the napkins, and through all of it, Ashkavel stays tucked against her side, occasionally chewing at the corner of her apron, occasionally craning his neck to look at something new, never once trying to drag himself away. I watch my son relax in the arms of a stranger more completely than I have seen him relax in a long time, and I do not know whether to feel grateful or ashamed. He does that a lot, Mira says at one point, nodding down at him gnawing on the fabric. Teething or something like it? Something like it, I say, because I genuinely am not certain. My staff would know. I realize, with a small and uncomfortable jolt, that I do not. She notices the hesitation, I think, but she does not comment on it directly. Instead, she shifts him slightly, checking the angle of his back with a light, careful touch, the kind of touch you would use on anything fragile that you did not want to hurt further. His legs don't work, she says, not as a question, just an observation, said in the same tone she might use to note that he has an unusual number of scales or an interesting pattern along his tail. No, I say. My voice comes out flatter than I intend, braced again for the moment her face changes. It does not change. She simply nods, the way you would nod at any piece of information about a small creature in your care, and adjusts her grip so his weight sits more comfortably against her side. Makes carrying him more of a workout then, she says, and there is something almost like humor in it, not cruelty, not pity, just the practical acknowledgement of a fact. I find myself staring at her, and I know I must look strange doing it, an emperor staring openly at a waitress in a trade station cafe, but I cannot help it. In my entire life, in every conversation I have ever had about my son's condition, there has always been a weight to the words, a careful softening, a bracing for grief. Mira says it the way you would mention the weather, his legs don't work, makes carrying him more of a workout, as if the fact itself carries no verdict, only a small adjustment to be made and then moved past. I ask her, eventually, when the lunch rush thins and she has a moment to breathe, why she is not more careful with him. It is a foolish question, phrased badly, and I regret it as soon as it leaves my mouth, but she does not take offense. Careful how? She asks, tilting her head. Careful the way you would be with something fragile, I say. Something that might break, or that people might be frightened by. She considers this for a moment, resting her hip against the counter, Ashkavel still tucked comfortably against her side. I mean, I am careful, she says. I don't want him falling or getting hurt. But careful isn't the same as scared, is it? Plenty of kids where I'm from need extra help getting around. You just help them get around. It's not some huge tragedy every time, it's just Tuesday. Just Tuesday. The phrase lodges itself somewhere in my chest and stays there. I try to explain, carefully, choosing my words the way I would in a diplomatic negotiation, that among my people, a hatchling born the way HFY was born is considered unfinished, that there are traditions, old ones, about what is supposed to happen to hatchlings like him. I do not go into detail about the rites themselves. I do not think I could say the words out loud even here, even to a stranger who has already shown more calm around my son than my entire court combined. Mira's expression shifts for the first time since I arrived, not into pity, but into something sharper, something closer to disbelief edging toward frustration. Supposed to happen how? She asks, and there is an edge in her voice now that was not there a moment ago. It does not matter, I say, too quickly, and she studies me for a long moment before deciding, apparently, not to push further right now, though I can tell from her face that this is a conversation we are not finished with. Instead, she changes the subject, gently. The way you redirect a conversation, you can see, is causing pain without pretending the pain is not there. She asks whether he has a proper harness for getting around, something built for his particular shape, and when I tell her he mostly stays in his transport carrier or is carried by staff, she makes a small, thoughtful sound and disappears into the back of the cafe for a few minutes. She returns with a length of sturdy fabric, some kind of carrying cloth used for stacking supplies, and sets it on the counter, studying HFY's shape with the practical eye of someone who has clearly figured out solutions to problems like this before. Whether for creatures or people, I do not know and do not ask. "Give me a minute," she says, and begins folding and knotting the fabric into a rough sling, testing it against her own shoulder, adjusting the length, tying it off, adjusting again. It takes her perhaps 10 minutes, interrupted twice by customers she serves, without losing her place in the folding, and at the end of it, she has built something that looks almost like the harnesses my finest artisans have failed to design correctly in 2 years of trying. She loops it over her shoulder and settles HFY into it, testing his weight, his balance, the angle of his spine against the fabric, and he chirps happily, craning his neck to look around from this new vantage point, higher and more secure than dragging himself along the floor has ever allowed. My hearts do something complicated and painful watching him look that pleased with something so simple. "This isn't perfect," Mira says, adjusting a knot near his shoulder. "You'd want something sturdier, maybe with a strap here for support, and probably padding along this part so it doesn't dig in. But it should hold him hands-free for a while, so whoever's carrying him can actually do things instead of just holding him all day." I ask her where she learned to do this, and she shrugs, the way people shrug when a thing feels too ordinary to explain. She mentions, briefly, a younger cousin back home who needed similar support getting around, and that you learn what works through trial and error, mostly, and asking people who have been doing it longer than you. She says this without any weight of tragedy in her voice at all, just the plain telling of an ordinary fact about her life. I realize, watching her adjust the sling one more time, that an entire world exists beyond the walls I have built around HFY, a world where hatchlings, or children, or whatever a species calls its young, who need extra help, are simply given that help, without ceremony, without shame, without the terrible weighted language my own people have built up around exactly this kind of difference. I have spent 2 years believing that hiding my son was an act of love, the only way to protect him from a world that would judge him the way my own court judges him. Watching Mira fold spare fabric into something that lets him see the world from a height he has never experienced before, I begin to understand, slowly and uncomfortably, that hiding him might not have been protection at all. It might have simply been another version of the shame my people have always attached to hatchlings like him, dressed up as care. HFY chirps again from his new sling, reaching one small claw toward a passing tray, and Mira laughs and gently redirects his attention with a scrap of bread instead, and I sit there on my stool in the middle of a human trade station, watching my son be happy in a way I have rarely seen, and I do not move to take him back for a long, long time. When I finally do rise to leave, Hours later than I ever intended, Mira helps me settle HFY and the sling into my arms with the same easy competence she has shown the entire time. And as I turn to go, she says something that stays with me long after we have left the station behind. "You should ask him what he wants sometime," she says, nodding at HFY. "He's not going to be able to tell you in words, maybe, but you'd be surprised how much a kid can tell you if you just pay attention instead of deciding for him." I do not have an answer for that. I only nod and thank her, and carry my son back toward my ship, feeling for the first time in 2 years that the walls I built around him might have been built for the wrong reasons entirely. I do not leave the station that night, and I do not leave the next morning either. My retinue grows uneasy, my officers reminding me quietly that the Dominion has business waiting, and that lingering at a minor trade outpost sends a strange signal to anyone watching our fleet's movements. I tell them I am reviewing supply contracts. This is not entirely a lie. It is also not the reason I keep finding myself back at the small cafe at the edge of the concourse, watching Mira balance trays, and children and small dragons with the same steady patience. Over the following days I learn things about my own son that 2 years of careful hiding never taught me. I learn that he prefers warm food to cold, that he startles at sudden loud noises but calms quickly if you simply speak to him rather than hush him into silence, that he has a particular chirp for hunger and a different one entirely for wanting to be somewhere higher up where he can see more of the room. Mira points these things out to me not as revelations but as simple observations, the kind any caretaker would notice within a few days of paying real attention, and I begin to understand exactly how much attention I have failed to pay. She adjusts the sling twice more over those days, refining the fit, adding a scrap of softer fabric along the strap that crosses his back so it does not press into the place where his spine curves wrong. She does this between serving customers, between arguing amiably with the cafe's owner about scheduling, between a dozen small ordinary tasks that make up her day, and never once does she treat the work of caring for my son as anything larger or more significant than any other task on her list. I begin to understand, watching her, that this is the difference between what I have called love for 2 years and what actual care might look like. I have loved HFY by protecting him from being seen. Mira cares for him by seeing him clearly, entirely, without flinching, and adjusting the world around him rather than hiding him from it. It is a difference I am only beginning to understand, and it will take everything I know about being an emperor, and everything I am only starting to learn about being a father, before I can act on it. On the 4th day, I finally ask Mira the question that has been building in me since the moment she first picked HFY up off the floor without a flicker of hesitation. "Why," I say, sitting on the same stool I have claimed as my own over these past few days, "did you not treat him as broken?" She is wiping down the counter when I ask it, and she pauses, not because the question offends her, but because she seems to be turning it over, trying to understand why I would need to ask something that, to her, seems obvious. "Broken how?" she says finally. "He's got a body that works differently than most. That's not broken, that's just how he is." "Among my people," I say, "a hatchling born the way he was born is considered a burden, a mouth that eats and gives nothing back. There are traditions built around removing that burden." I watch her face carefully as I say this, waiting again for the reaction I have braced for since the first day, and this time it comes, though not in the shape I expected. She does not recoil in horror, exactly. Instead, her jaw sets, and something hard and steady enters her eyes, the look of someone deciding that a thing they have just heard is simply wrong, without any need for further debate. "That's a garbage tradition," she says, "and there is no venom in it, only the flat certainty of someone stating a fact. Where I'm from, kids who need extra help just get extra help. That's not a tragedy. That's not some huge burden everyone has to whisper about. It's just part of raising a kid. Some kids need glasses. Some kids need a wheelchair. Some kids need someone to carry them around in a sling because their legs don't work the way other kids' legs work. None of that makes them less of a person." "You say this so simply," I say, "as though it costs nothing to believe." It doesn't cost anything to believe, she says. It might cost something to actually do the work of it, sure. Building the ramps, making the accommodations, showing up for the kid every day, even on the hard days. That part takes effort. But believing a kid is worth that effort in the first place? That part should be free. I sit with this for a long moment, turning the words over the way I would turn over a difficult passage of law, trying to find the flaw in it, the loophole, the reason it could not simply be true. I do not find one. I only find, sitting there, the uncomfortable understanding that an entire species scattered across a modest handful of systems, without a fraction of the Dominion's power or history, has built something into its culture that my empire, for all its strength, never managed to build at all. Where I come from, I say slowly, strength is everything. A ruler who cannot demonstrate strength in his own bloodline is considered unfit to rule. A hatchling who cannot fly, who cannot fight, is treated as evidence that the bloodline itself has weakened. Mira considers this, wiping down a stretch of counter that does not particularly need wiping, clearly using the motion to give herself a moment to think. That's a strange way to measure strength, she says eventually. Seems like the actual strong thing would be sticking by your kid no matter what he can or can't do. Anybody can love an easy kid. Takes something real to love one people tell you not to. I do not have an answer for that either, and I begin to suspect I will spend a great deal of this conversation without answers, because every response I have prepared over years of hearing these arguments from my own advisors crumbles a little further each time she speaks. I ask her about her own family, partly out of genuine curiosity, and partly, I think, to give myself a moment away from the weight of what she has just said. She tells me, in the unhurried way she tells most things, about a cousin back on her homeworld, born with a condition that left one of his legs shorter than the other, about the years of adjustments, the specialized shoes, the surgeries, the ordinary frustrations of growing up needing something a little different from everyone else. She does not tell it as a tragedy. She tells it as a story about a boy who grew up loved, who is now, by her account, doing perfectly well for himself, working some job involving numbers that she does not fully understand but is clearly proud of anyway. Nobody in my family ever once talked about getting rid of him, she says, and there is something in the way she says it, blunt and unadorned, that lands harder than any impassioned speech could have. That's just not a thing we do. You don't throw away family because the model comes with a defect. You just, I don't know, you figure it out. You just figure it out. I think of my own advisors, the careful language they use, the word unfinished, sitting in every conversation about my son like a verdict already passed, and I think of how differently the same situation could look, had my people ever simply decided, generations ago, to figure it out instead of discarding what did not fit their idea of strength. Ashkevel, settled in his sling against the counter where Mira has propped him for the moment, reaches one small claw toward her sleeve and tugs, chirping the particular sound she has taught me to recognize as a request for attention rather than hunger, and she reaches down without looking, scratching gently behind the ridge of his jaw, the way you would soothe any small creature seeking comfort. He settles immediately, eyes half closing, and I watch this simple exchange and feel something in my chest that I do not have a word for in my own language, something between grief for the 2 years I have already lost and something that might, cautiously, be called hope. It is on the 5th day, as I am preparing to finally return to my ship and begin the journey back toward the Dominion, that the message arrives. It comes through my personal channel, marked with the seal of my chief advisor, and the tone of it is careful in the particular way messages are careful when they are trying not to alarm you, while still making clear that alarm is warranted. Word has reached the homeworld, the message says, of my extended stay at a minor human trade station, and rumors have begun circulating regarding the reason for the delay, specifically rumors regarding my son and regarding a human woman seen carrying him in public. I read the message twice, standing in the corridor just outside the cafe. Ashkevel settled comfortably in his sling against my own chest now, having grown used to my carrying him this way over these last days, instead of leaving him always in the arms of staff. The message does not say the word unfinished. It does not need to. The careful phrasing around it says everything the word would have said anyway. There is more. A faction within the court, one that has long resented the strength of my claim to the throne, has apparently begun using the rumor as the beginning of an argument, whispered for now but growing louder, that an emperor who cannot properly manage the private matter of his own bloodline cannot be trusted to properly manage the affairs of an empire. It is, I recognize immediately, an old and familiar kind of political maneuver, using a private grief as a public weapon, and I have watched it used against other families before without ever expecting it turned toward my own. I stand there for a long moment, the message glowing on the small device in my hand, Ashkevel's weight warm and solid against my chest, and I feel the old instinct rise in me immediately and powerfully, the instinct that has governed 2 years of hiding him away. Retreat. Contain the story. Send him somewhere quiet and out of sight until the rumors die down on their own, the way rumors always eventually do when there is nothing new to feed them. I turn back toward the cafe, intending only to say a brief farewell to Mira, before beginning whatever careful process of damage control my advisors will insist on, and I find her already watching me from behind the counter, her expression sharp, with the particular kind of attention people give you when they can tell something has gone wrong. "Bad news?" she asks. I consider lying, the way I have lied about so many things concerning Ashkevel for so long, softening the truth into something more manageable, more palatable, more suited to a stranger who does not need to be burdened with the internal politics of an empire she has no stake in. Instead, for reasons I do not fully examine in the moment, I tell her the truth. There are people in my court, I say, who believe my son's condition proves I am unfit to rule. They have begun using this journey, and your kindness toward him, as evidence against me. Mira's expression does not soften into sympathy the way I half expect. It sharpens instead, the same hard, steady look she gave me when I first mentioned the old rites, the look of someone encountering something they find plainly, obviously wrong. It is not really a question, it is closer to a challenge, and I understand, standing there with my son's weight against my chest, and the whole architecture of my empire's expectations pressing down from the other direction, that whatever answer I give her in this moment is going to matter far more than either of us can fully know yet. I do not answer her question that day. I tell her only that I do not yet know, which is the truth, and I return to my ship with Ashkevel still settled in the sling she built for him, and the message from my chief advisor sitting like a stone in my chest the entire journey home. The trip back to the Dominion homeworld takes 11 days, and I spend most of them in the small private chamber where Ashkevel sleeps, watching him breathe, turning Mira's question over and over without finding an answer I am satisfied with. "So what are you going to do about it?" It sounds simple when she says it. It does not feel simple at all, when the answer might cost me a throne that has belonged to my bloodline for longer than human history has been recorded. My chief advisor meets me at the landing platform before I have even fully disembarked, and I know from the set of her shoulders that the situation has grown worse during the journey rather than better. Her name is Threll, and she has served 3 emperors before me, and in all my years working alongside her, I have never once seen her look as tense as she looks standing on that platform, waiting for me with a datapad clutched against her chest like a shield. "The Voss faction has moved faster than we expected," she says, without preamble, falling into step beside me as I carry Ashkevel toward the palace. "Lord Kesserin Voss has requested an audience before the full council, citing what he calls a matter of succession stability. He intends to argue that your handling of the hatchling, and specifically your extended and public association with a human caretaker, demonstrates a pattern of judgment unfit for the throne. He intends to use my son as a weapon," I say. "He intends to use the rumor of your son as a weapon," Threll corrects, and there is something almost gentle in the correction, though her tone remains clipped and formal. Very few in the court have actually seen the hatchling directly. Most of what is circulating is second-hand, exaggerated in places, and Voss will use every gap in public knowledge to fill it with whatever serves him best. I ask her what she recommends, mostly out of habit, because Threll has never once failed to have a recommendation ready, and this time is no different, though the recommendation costs me something to hear. Distance, she says simply. Publicly transfer the hatchling's care to a private estate outside the capital, effective immediately. Issue a statement describing the human caretaker as hired staff engaged for a temporary medical consultation, nothing more. Let the story die from lack of new material. Voss has nothing to build on if there is nothing left to see. It is, I recognize immediately, exactly the strategy I would have chosen without hesitation 2 weeks ago. Contain the story. Remove the visible evidence. Wait for the rumor to starve. It has worked for 2 years already, this exact strategy, applied quietly and continuously to Ashkevel's entire existence, and there is no reason to believe it would not work again now. I find, walking through the corridors of my own palace with my son settled warm and trusting against my chest, that I cannot make myself agree to it. No, I say, and Threll stops walking, clearly startled by the flatness of the refusal. My lord, she says carefully, I understand this is difficult, but Voss is not a minor irritant. He has allies among the older houses, and if this narrative gains enough traction before the council session, the vote of confidence could genuinely be contested. This is not a moment for sentiment. I am aware of what it is a moment for, I say, and I am surprised by how steady my own voice sounds, given how unsteady I feel underneath it. I am simply no longer certain that hiding my son is the correct response, regardless of what it costs politically. Threll studies me for a long moment, the datapad still held against her chest, and something in her expression shifts, not quite understanding, but something adjacent to it, a recognition that the Emperor standing in front of her is not entirely the same one who left for a routine resupply mission 11 days ago. The council session is called for the following morning, and I spend that night unable to sleep, sitting instead in the chamber where Ashkevel rests, watching the slow rise and fall of his breathing, listening to the occasional soft chirp he makes in his sleep, and turning Mira's blunt, unadorned questions over in my mind, alongside Threll's careful political calculations, trying to find some version of the truth that satisfies both. I do not find one. What I find instead, sometime near the middle of the night, is a simpler and more frightening question, one that has nothing to do with politics at all. What kind of father do I want to have been by the time Ashkevel is old enough to understand what has been said about him and done to hatchlings like him in the empire he was born into? I open a private channel before dawn and send a brief message back to the trade station, uncertain whether it will even reach her before the shift change, and Mira responds faster than I expect, her voice coming through slightly distorted by the distance between us, but unmistakably her own, blunt and unhurried even across the gap of stars. I tell her about the council session, about Voss, about Threll's recommendation to send Ashkevel away quietly and let the rumor starve. I tell her I do not know what to do. There is a pause on her end, long enough that I wonder if the connection has failed, and then she says the thing that ends up settling the matter more completely than any of Threll's careful arguments or my own private doubts managed to. If you hide him now, she says, after everything, what does that teach him? That he's something to be embarrassed about, that the solution to people saying ugly things about him is to make him disappear instead of standing next to him. Is that really the story you want him growing up believing about himself? I do not answer immediately, and she does not fill the silence the way a courtier would, does not soften the question or offer an easier version of it. She simply lets it sit there, exactly as heavy as it is. He's going to figure out someday what the word unfinished means to your people, she continues, quieter now. The only real choice you have is whether he learns it as something his father was ashamed enough of to hide, or something his father stood in front of and said, "This is my son, and I am not moving." The council chamber the next morning is full in a way I have rarely seen it. Every house represented, every advisor present, the air thick with the particular tension that accompanies a challenge to succession, however carefully worded. Lord Kesserin Voss stands near the center of the floor when I enter, an older dragon of considerable size and considerable patience, the kind of opponent who has clearly been waiting for exactly this opportunity for a very long time. He begins carefully, exactly as Threll predicted, framing his concerns not as an attack, but as a matter of stability, of tradition, of ensuring that the bloodline occupying the throne demonstrates the strength the Dominion has always required of its rulers. He speaks of rumors reaching the court, of an extended and unexplained delay at a minor trade station, of a human caretaker seen carrying what witnesses describe as a hatchling unable to walk on its own. I raise this not out of cruelty, he says, and I can hear in his tone the practiced sincerity of someone who has rehearsed this exact line many times, but out of genuine concern for the strength of the throne. If the Emperor's own bloodline shows weakness, what does that signal to the Dominion, and to every rival power watching for exactly such a signal? There is a murmur through the chamber, not overwhelming but present, and I understand in that moment that whatever answer I give in the next few minutes will define not only the outcome of this council session, but the entire remainder of my reign, and far more importantly than that, the entire remainder of Ashkevel's life within it. I could offer the careful answer Threll prepared for me on the walkover, a diplomatic non-denial, a promise to review the matter privately, language vague enough to satisfy no one but delay everyone, the kind of answer that has kept difficult questions at bay for centuries. I feel the shape of that answer sitting ready in my mouth, familiar and safe. Instead, I turn toward the entrance of the chamber, where Threll is waiting exactly as I instructed her the night before, and I give the signal we agreed upon. The doors open, and a member of my personal staff walks in carrying my son, settled in the very sling Mira built for him out of spare fabric in a cafe kitchen 5 days and 1,000 light years away, his small head lifted, looking around the chamber with the same open curiosity he shows everywhere he goes, entirely unaware that he has just become the center of the most consequential political moment his father has ever faced. The murmur through the chamber does not simply grow, it nearly stops entirely, replaced by a silence so complete I can hear the soft click of Ashkevel's claws shifting against the fabric of his sling. Lord Voss's expression flickers, just slightly, clearly having expected me to defend an absence, not to fill the room with the exact presence he was counting on remaining hidden. I walk forward, take my son from my staff member's arms, and turn to face the full council, Ashkevel settled against my chest, his weight familiar now in a way it never was before this journey, and I speak the words that Threll advised against, that centuries of tradition never prepared me to say, and that I know, even as I say them, will change everything that comes after. This is my son, I say. His name is Ashkevel. His legs do not work the way tradition demands a hatchling's legs should work. I have spent 2 years hiding this fact, and I have come to understand, very recently, that the hiding was never protection. It was shame, dressed carefully enough that I mistook it for love. The silence in the chamber deepens further, if such a thing is possible, and Lord Voss opens his mouth, clearly intending to redirect the moment back toward his prepared argument, but I do not give him the chance. You ask what it signals, I say. If the Emperor's bloodline shows what you call weakness, I will tell you what it signals instead. It signals that an empire built for 1,000 years on discarding what does not fit a narrow measure of strength has never once asked whether that measure was the correct one to begin with. I intend to ask that question now, in front of this entire council, and I intend to answer it. Lord Voss recovers quickly. I will give him that much credit. He straightens, folds his claws behind his back, and addresses the chamber in the same measured tone he began with, though I can hear the effort it now costs him to maintain it. Sentiment, he says, is a fine thing for a father. It is a dangerous thing for an emperor. Tradition exists because it has kept this dominion strong for 1,000 years. You cannot simply discard it because a human waitress made you feel differently about your son. The chamber stirs at that, and I feel something settle in me, cold and clear, the particular steadiness that comes when an opponent has just handed you the exact opening you needed. You are correct that a human waitress changed how I see my son. I say. She did not do it with speeches. She did it by picking him up off the floor of her cafe without a moment's hesitation and asking whether he had eaten that day. In 2 years, not one member of this court asked me that question. Not one advisor, not one physician assigned to his care, not one member of my own household staff. They asked instead whether the matter had been handled, whether arrangements had been considered, whether the situation required attention before it became a liability. I look around the chamber slowly as I say this, meeting the eyes of advisors who have, at various points over the last 2 years, used exactly that careful language with me, and I watch more than a few of them look away. You call it tradition, I continue, turning back to Voss. I have come to understand it as something narrower and less noble than that. It is fear, wearing tradition's clothing, fear that a hatchling who cannot fly reflects poorly on the parent who made him, fear that strength measured only in wings and claws is the only strength worth measuring. I do not intend to govern this dominion out of that particular fear any longer. And if the dominion's enemies see this hatchling, Voss says, his patience finally beginning to fray at the edges, and conclude that our bloodlines have weakened, that our emperor values sentiment over strength, what then? Then they will be wrong, I say, the same way you are wrong, and I intend to prove it the same way I intend to prove everything else in this chamber today, not with more hiding, with results. I turn away from Voss and address the full council directly, and I feel, as I speak, that I am not reciting a prepared statement so much as finally saying aloud the thing I have known since the 5th day at that small trade station, watching Mira adjust a scrap of fabric so my son could see the world from somewhere higher than the floor. Effective from this session forward, I say, the old rites concerning hatchlings born with what our tradition calls incomplete form are ended. No hatchling will be surrendered to those rites again, in any house, of any rank, for any reason. Every house of this dominion will be required to provide appropriate care, support, and mobility assistance for any hatchling who needs it, the same as any hatchling receives food, shelter, and education. This will not be treated as charity extended to the unfortunate. It will be treated as an ordinary and unremarkable part of raising the next generation of this empire, the same as it should have been treated all along. There is uproar at this, of course, exactly the kind Threll warned me to expect. Houses shouting objections about cost, about tradition, about the practicality of retrofitting palaces and estates, built without any consideration for hatchlings who cannot fly or walk unaided. I let the uproar run its course for a while, because I understand that some resistance was always going to come, and because shouting it out in the open, where it can be answered, is better than letting it fester quietly in private conversations, the way it has for 1,000 years. When the chamber finally settles enough for me to be heard again, I do not offer further argument. I simply hold my son a little higher, so that every house represented in that chamber can see him clearly, small and curious, and entirely unbothered by the storm of politics swirling around him, chirping softly at the unfamiliar echo of so many voices in such a large room. Look at him, I say. This is what you have all been calling unfinished. I am asking this council, plainly, to explain to me what exactly is unfinished about a hatchling who is curious, who is affectionate, who reaches for the world with whatever part of himself still works, rather than giving up simply because another part does not. I have looked, and I cannot find the flaw you are all so certain exists. I suspect the flaw was never in the hatchling at all. Lord Voss does not concede gracefully. He rallies what support he can among the older houses, presses for a formal vote, rather than accepting my decree by fiat, and I allow the vote, because I understand that a decree accepted grudgingly under protest carries less weight than one the council actually chooses. The vote takes the better part of that day, and much of the following one, and it is closer than Threll would have liked, though not nearly as close as Voss needed it to be. When it finally passes, it does so not because every house in that chamber has suddenly abandoned centuries of belief, but because enough of them, faced directly with the sight of my son, rather than the rumor of him, could not quite bring themselves to vote to preserve a tradition that looked, in that moment, exactly as cruel as it actually was. The weeks that follow are not simple. Changing a law is easier than changing the belief underneath it, and I know this even as I sign the decree into permanent record. There are houses that comply with the letter of the new law, while making clear, through smaller and quieter cruelties, that they have not accepted its spirit. There are advisors who continue to speak of Ashkevel in careful, softened tones, unable to fully unlearn the habit, even after I have made my own position unmistakable. Threll tells me, honestly, that it will likely take a generation before the word unfinished stops carrying the weight it has carried for 1,000 years, if it ever stops entirely. I accept this. I did not expect one council session to undo 1,000 years of fear in an afternoon. I only needed it to begin, and it has begun. I send a message to Mira not long after the vote passes, describing what happened in the council chamber, describing the decree and the vote, and Voss's grudging, furious retreat from the political challenge he had been building for weeks. Her response arrives a few days later, characteristically brief and characteristically her, something to the effect that she is glad it worked out, that she never doubted he'd come around eventually, followed immediately by a question about whether the new law actually includes funding for proper mobility equipment, or whether it is one of those laws that sounds impressive and accomplishes nothing in practice. I spend the better part of an afternoon drafting a detailed response, and I find myself smiling as I write it, in a way I do not think I have smiled while doing palace business in longer than I can remember. Over the following year, the palace workshops, under direct orders and no longer treating the project as an embarrassment to be handled quietly, finally produce something worthy of the problem they have been failing to solve properly for 2 years. A proper mobility harness, built from lightweight alloy and cushioned fabric, designed specifically for Ashkevel's particular curve of spine, allowing him to move through the halls of the palace at something close to a proper walking pace, his front claws providing balance, while the frame supports the back legs that will never work on their own. It is not perfect. He tires more quickly than a hatchling with full use of all 4 limbs, and there are corridors in the older parts of the palace that remain difficult for him to navigate, stairs and narrow passages built centuries ago without any thought for exactly this kind of need. But it is real progress, built openly, by artisans no longer ashamed of the project they have been assigned, and I make certain every house in the Dominion knows precisely why the project exists and precisely whose insistence made it happen. Ashkevel grows, as hatchlings do, faster than seems possible some days, and painfully slowly on others, and by the time a full cycle has passed since that council session, he moves through the palace halls in his frame with a confidence that still catches in my chest every time I watch it, chirping greetings to staff who have learned, slowly, to greet him back rather than look away, reaching curious claws toward anything new that catches his attention, exactly as he always has, no longer dragging himself across the floor in secret, but walking, however differently, in full view of anyone who cares to watch. I invite Mira to the homeworld more than once over that year, each invitation carrying the particular weight of an emperor's personal request rather than a formal state summons, and each time she responds with the same easy, unbothered practicality that first startled me in that small cafe. She visits exactly once, a journey she describes afterward as interesting mostly for reasons that have nothing to do with the grandeur of the palace or the significance of the decree, reasons involving the surprisingly edible quality of Dominion cuisine, and a firm and detailed opinion about whether the new mobility frame's shoulder strap is properly padded. She spends an afternoon with Ashkevel in the palace gardens, adjusting the frame slightly with the same practical hands that once folded spare cafe fabric into a working sling, checking his comfort, asking him directly, in the plain, unhurried tone she uses for everything, whether it pinches anywhere, whether he likes the new speed the frame allows him, whether he is happy. She asks him these questions the way she asked them the very first day, as though the answers matter regardless of whether he can fully form the words back to her yet, and I watch this and understand, more clearly than I did even in the council chamber, exactly what she meant that first week, about paying attention rather than simply deciding for him. Before she leaves, she finds me alone in the corridor outside the garden, and she does not offer any grand farewell, does not comment on the weight of what has changed in the Dominion since that first day at her cafe. She only tells me, in the same blunt and steady voice I have come to rely on more than I expected to, that I am doing right by the kid, and that I should keep doing it, even on the days when the whole court makes it difficult, because kids notice which parents keep showing up, and which ones only show up when it is convenient. I tell her I intend to. I mean it entirely. Ashkevel is asleep in his own chamber that night, worn out from an afternoon spent exploring the garden at a pace that would have been impossible for him only a year earlier, and I sit beside him for a while, the way I have taken to doing most nights now, no longer hiding this habit from staff or advisors the way I once might have. I think of the 2 years I spent believing that love meant walls, that protection meant invisibility, and I think of a small cafe at the edge of a trade station where a human woman with no stake in Dominion politics simply picked up my son off the floor and asked whether he had eaten. It was such a small thing. In the moment it happened, I understand now that it was not small at all. It was the entire beginning of everything that followed. An empire's oldest cruelty finally questioned, not by a philosopher or a rebel or a grand movement, but by a waitress who saw a hatchling dragging himself across her floor and simply decided, without a single moment of hesitation, that he was worth carrying.